Alrighty, testing Twitch 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Sounds good there. YouTube pick it up. Yep, I think we're good.
All right. Hello and welcome to episode 189 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about the Esports World Cup. The CDL and now EWC season is over. All the major Call of Duty events for the 2024-2025 season have concluded, and I think we probably have a clear, definitive winner for the best team in the game, a conversation that we brought up on the last episode. We also have a bunch of other stuff to talk about during the, talking about the fallout of EWC and the things that have come around that. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Like you said, final episode of the final tournament of the Black Ops 6 competitive season, at least on the pro level, and if there's no like fan hosted tournaments or anything along those lines, for as far as we know, the official schedule is done and dusted, and exciting time as it is for uh you know as the sun sets on Black Ops 6, sun's going to start to rise on Roster Mania and Black Ops 7, so still going to be a ton of stuff for us to talk about, but we do obviously have this EWC event to talk about first, and as you alluded to, OpTic, I don't think, I don't know what adjective I'm trying to think of, but they pretty convincingly took care of business once again, won back-to-back events to close out the season, and gave us our third team in Black Ops 6 to win 2 consecutive tournaments out of the 6 major tournaments this year.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start with our conversation, because we discussed last week or a week and a half ago when we did our last episode. We brought up this conversation that has been kind of circling the community about if OpTic were to win this event, would they be considered the best team in the game? And if they didn't win this event, probably more importantly, would they still be considered the best team in the game, considering they won champs? They got the World Championship, which is obviously the most valuable prize in competitive Call of Duty. Or would a team like Atlanta FaZe or FaZe Clan or LA Thieves or a 100 Thieves, would those teams be considered the best team in Black Ops 6 if they were to win? Fortunately, we don't have to really litigate all of that this time around, because OpTic did win their second event in a row. They won the 2 biggest events in terms of prize pool. Whether, I would say this is on par with a major at the very least, likely much bigger than a major, even though it is a very different format than what we've been used to during the CDL majors or even the minors for that matter. But OpTic won the World Championship and now have won EWC. They did not win this easily. It was not like the simplest run for them. Particularly their semifinal against Team Heretics was very close, very contested, but in the end they were able to get to the grand finals. And then unfortunately for the Vancouver Surge, who lost 4 grand finals this season, I believe, and were swept in 3 of them, if I'm not mistaken. They lose 4-0 to OpTic in a rematch of the CDL Championship Grand Finals. So OpTic wins their second event, and that, like you said, ties Atlanta FaZe, who won the first 2 majors of the season, and that also ties LA Thieves, who won the last 2 majors of the season. I assume what your answer is going to be, but I just want to ask it: is this EWC win proof that OpTic Texas or OpTic Gaming is the best team in Black Ops 6?
I do think that little caveat that you had at the end there it's something we didn't consider uh, last year when we were talking about EWC and we got into that whole like three-peat for FaZe and everything like that, but we didn't have to because they competed as Atlanta FaZe at EWC last year. But I believe even Scump said, and maybe Hex on the watch party, that this is the first time OpTic Gaming has won a COD tournament since Black Ops 4, I believe is what they were saying.
Las
Um,
Vegas?
that's what I was thinking, yeah. And I think somebody tweeted the year, and I just can't. If it was Las Vegas, I think it was the end of 2017. But regardless, that is a little interesting, just because technicality and the haters and everything can say that. They can also say this is a single elimination bracket, which is a little funky. Another interesting caveat too is you kind of mentioned like comparing it to majors, but technically OpTic's 2 wins at these last few tournaments. One for champs was an 8-team tournament, and this was a 16-team tournament. Obviously, majors are 12-team tournaments. Um, but all that looped in really can just be thrown out the window. I think it's important to at least mention, but end of the day, the two biggest tournaments at the end of the season with the most money on the line, OpTic showed up in what can only be described as a historic comeback from the 0-18 streak during the start of the season where they lost 18 straight maps to winning 9 straight matches to end the season at the two biggest tournaments. Um, if you don't want to say outright that they're the best team of Black Ops 6 because quote they have 2 tournament wins, FaZe has 2 tournament wins, LAT has 2 tournament wins. I think I don't agree with that, and I think I guess you could make arguments for those other teams, but I don't think you can argue that they are the most dominant team just in terms of how they won these tournaments and with everything on the line. And when you compare their performances at these 2 tournaments to the other 2 teams in discussion for that best title, like OpTic really was on just another level, really, since bringing in Mercules, but obviously since champs and this tournament now. So I think it is pretty clear cut that OpTic should go down as the best team of Black Ops 6. Um, and yeah, I mean, shout out to those guys. It was really kind of like you said, like, it was pretty dominant when you look at their map count and everything. I believe it was a 30-6 map count combined for them at champs and EWC, and I think they only lost 3 maps at EWC.
Yes.
And the teams that they played en route to it, although it is a single elimination bracket, the fact they had to go through 100 Thieves, LAT, Miami Heretics or Team Heretics, and then Vancouver Surge, like unquestionably, that's 3 of the top 5
Yeah.
teams this year. Outside, the only team missing from that group is FaZe. Regardless of where you want to rank them, that's 3 of the top, well, including OpTic, 4 of the top 5 teams this year, and OpTic had to beat 3 of them to claim
Mhm.
the second title. I think that goes a long way too in any form of debate in terms of how dominant OpTic's end of the season is. But yeah, just looking at I mean, OpTic always does a great job in terms of producing content and everything like that. But I cannot wait for whatever type of I've seen people talking about like the process or whatever type of vlog or video documentary they put out for this season. Like it's going to be absolutely incredible because OpTic's always recording and they undoubtedly have a lot of footage from earlier this year when they were struggling that they probably didn't release. But just in my head, thinking about like a video where they have that, they start the video off with that sort of footage and it feeds into uh, the highs of champs and EWC after showing the absolute lowest of lows that they experienced earlier in the season. Um, I am thankful that for the way it played out with a team like OpTic because if this happened, let's just not to throw them under the bus, but like if the old Paris Legion, if this was the type of season that they ever had, like we're not getting any type of video or documentary footage or anything like that. It's just it is what it is. But OpTic's great at telling stories, producing content, all this stuff, and I definitely am looking forward to inevitably whatever type of content they push out to really tell the story of the Black Ops 6 season, and it should be a good one to relive whenever. I mean, I don't think they've confirmed it, but I would be surprised if something incredible just isn't dropped out of all this.
Yeah, we talked about on the last episode, but this is probably the greatest turnaround in Call of Duty history, because when you win champs, like I think both of us, considering how poorly OpTic had done throughout this entire season, I think there is some hesitance to proclaim that they're the best team or that they had the best season when you saw how bad they were and how they basically looked like they had no shot at really, like they were so close to not even making champs. You thought, okay, there's no way that they're really going to have any kind of success even later in the season. And that has completely changed. It's not just one event now, it's two events. And like you mentioned and you illustrated, it's not just two event wins, it's two events in which they dominated. 30-6 map count, like you said. They went through the group play in this tournament. They swept both of their opponents. Then they beat 100 Thieves 3-1. They had that thrilling match against Heretics in the semifinals where it comes, the first map is decided by 1 point. The second map is decided by round 11. The third map is decided by round 5. So, so many things could have went wrong there. And really they did, because they lost the first two maps there and really could have been eliminated. And then they reverse sweep Heretics, and then they go on to sweep Vancouver in the grand finals. So, I think definitively, no disrespect to the New York Subliners in 2022 or 21-22, where they had this incredible turnaround. For this kind of turnaround to go from potentially the worst team, losing to the Vegas Falcons, losing to LAG, and then to win champs and EWC at the end of the season, I just can't think of a better turnaround story than what OpTic has experienced this season. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I would love to, like you said, watch how they did this. I want to see the dysfunction that certainly had to be there in December and January and February, pretty much all the way until they get Mercules in the building, it seemed like, and everything seemed to click into place from there. It's just kind of ridiculous that a team as talented as them, even early in the season, wasn't able to kind of put it together until they finally did so. But it's really not about like how you start, it's how you finish, and they've finished better than pretty much any team in history. Like the New York Subliners kind of come to mind, where they won, I believe, 2 or 3 events to end the season. United in 2019, I believe, where they win the CWL finals and then win champs. Like there are things like that, but even those teams were not as far gone and seemingly hopeless as OpTic was. And it's kind of in stark contrast to the other two teams that we expected OpTic to form that top 3 with this season in Atlanta FaZe and LA Thieves. When we came into this year, we made it very clear that it was a 3-team league, essentially. It was Atlanta, it was LA, and it was OpTic. There were really no other competitors in terms of like the very top spot in the CDL. And what we saw for most of the season was 2 teams showing up and being super competitive and being the championship contenders that we thought they would be. But at the end of the season, OpTic ascended and did way, way better than any of us could probably have imagined. And FaZe and 100 Thieves, for whatever reason, kind of fell by the wayside. At this event, 100 Thieves, they lose to OpTic in the quarterfinals, so they finish tied for top 8. FaZe doesn't even get to the quarterfinals, which is truly shocking, because they've really only struggled against a handful of teams. And this tournament, they lose to Omit, a challengers team, in the group play qualification match, to get knocked out. And they nearly lost to them in their first match of this tournament as well. So, I don't want to take anything away from Omit, but the fact that FaZe is pretty much dominated against most of the teams in the CDL this season, and then at champs they get top 6, I believe, and then they get top 12 at this event. I'm just kind of shocked. What did you think of, just to move off OpTic real quick, but what did you think of LA Thieves, or 100 Thieves, I guess, at this event, and FaZe, and how they performed?
Yeah, I think uh, FaZe for starters, since they technically got a worse placing than 100 Thieves at this event. I texted you when they were playing Omit for the first time that Octane was on. He was obviously doing his own watch party. I was watching Zuma's watch party, and he basically compared like this first match for between FaZe and Omit to the legendary showdown between OpTic and Panda Gaming back in IW, when it looked like OpTic were on the ropes of potentially getting a top 16 placing, I believe, at that
I
Atlanta
believe so.
tournament. And there was talks about would that have been the end of the dynasty, yada yada. And the comparisons are pretty, they're there if you want to make them between, at least the FaZe trio and this match as well as the OpTic versus Panda one there. So I thought that was definitely interesting. And it certainly is interesting that how it worked out, where FaZe had to work super hard to even avoid that upset the first time around. Then they play them again, and they do, uh, you know, they do end up losing to that Omet squad, which we can talk about a little bit later. I think already some people pretty excited about the guys on that squad, and potentially what they could do if they're given CDL opportunities next year, given what they showed at this event. Um, but yeah, and end of the day for FaZe, it almost feels like an inevitability in my eyes. If it wasn't, already inevitable based on the end of their season at champs, I think this adds further fuel to the fire that it almost feels like FaZe are guaranteed to make at least one roster change. Um, could be a very real scenario where even if it's more than one change, then obviously the legendary Atlanta FaZe trio of Abizi, Simp, and Celium would have to be, um, disbanded and go their separate ways. But I think that they also tweeted that the top 12 finish is the worst placing of Simp's career, which is pretty bonkers. I guess it does make sense in terms of not only how dominant Atlanta FaZe have been in the CDL era, but just given the format and everything for most of the tournaments that he competed in outside of his first year in the CWL, there really weren't many opportunities for him to do worse than top 12 unless he literally came dead last and got double first rounded at one of these CDL majors. Um, but nonetheless, I think, at least in terms of Simp, that would be a really, in my eyes, it'd be a really shitty way for his FaZe tenure to end if it literally, he goes to another team and leaves FaZe after getting his worst placing ever in his career up to this point. That would feel kind of bad, and I don't know if that would be a factor at all in his thinking or the team's thinking or whatnot. But end of the day, I feel like it almost feels like a certainty that um, this tournament result will lead to FaZe making changes ahead of next season.
I think, yeah, I think it was probably going to happen anyway, because they had already had the poor performance at champs a year ago, and then they do something similar this year. Even though they win EWC last year, like, we have to obviously admit to ourselves, like, EWC does not have the same prestige. So them winning it, I think, was a boost of confidence, but it wasn't like, okay, we're all the way back. I think it was like, we're back enough to go forward with this roster again. And then, of course, they win the first two majors, and then it feels like, okay, we're actually back. Like, there's no no half measures. Like, we're fully operational again. We are the best team in the game. But it is something to be concerned about that after those first two majors, I think it was a top 6 finish, I believe, at major 3, if I'm not mistaken. Major 4, they obviously didn't win, and then at champs, it falls apart again, and they get top 6 a year after I believe they got top 6 as well. So, and then EWC they get top 12. Like you said, Simp's worst finish. I would imagine FaZe. Well, it has to be if Simp's on it, but that's obviously FaZe's worst finish since the CDL. Um, it's
Oh,
just
the other
kind of
one that comes to mind is when they lost to Classic in
yeah.
in Seattle at the end of Cold War. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No. But that's kind of like it's unacceptable, right? Because it's essentially what Nadeshot said about 100 Thieves when they had that one slip up early in the season where it's like I don't want to see our guys get off the game until their eyes are bleeding, basically. But that is kind of what these teams should think, especially when it's not like, oh, we finished third or we finished second, we lost. No, like you finished top 12. And I want to illustrate that by saying the teams that FaZe Clan finished on par with or below at EWC. They finished on par with Team Falcons, a team that won, whatever, 3 or 4 matches in the CDL season. LAG, who won maybe 1 or 2 more matches than Vegas did. Cloud9, who did not make champs and had made a roster change coming into this event. Five Fears, an all challengers team. Omit, an all challengers team. The Boston Breach, who we talked about was completely up or down this season. 100 Thieves, who kind of look like a shell of themselves in all honesty, considering how great they were in the back half of the season. And then teams that they were competing with all season long: Heretics, obviously Toronto is Movistar Koi, Vancouver, like these teams that FaZe was competing with and oftentimes better than throughout the season, and they finished below or on par with them. And the same thing at Champs, like they finished below Boston, they finished below the Heretics, they finished below Surge. So I just think it's one of those things where it's for other teams that's acceptable, but for FaZe, for OpTic, for LAT, those teams just don't accept that they're a lesser than. They have to keep to kind of going for it, I guess. Like they're trying to win championships, not just make it to Saturday of an event. So and I can excuse FaZe losing in the grand finals. I think it is very, very hard if you're making it all the time, of course, to win every single grand finals, because other teams are not making it nearly as often, but they might be winning it more often when they actually get there. But FaZe has had so many grand finals that I think it kind of evens out in the end. But this is not that. This is them completely underperforming, and I do believe, like you, that this is time for a roster change. It's they usually give it, sometimes it's a year. They don't make in-season roster changes. That's something that Atlanta FaZe has kind of stuck to, I believe, throughout their entire history in the CDL. I don't believe they've ever made an in-season roster change, aside from like a emergency substitute. I think Classic came in, but the first year they had Priesta and Major Maniac. I think they went all the way through, and rightfully so. I mean, it's easy not to make roster changes when you consistently finish atop the regular season standings, because that usually means that you're the best or one of the best teams, but they've never done it before. I don't think that they're going to start, but the off season is when they could actually make some moves. Who that is for, like how you do that is, going to be tough, but I also think it helps because I would imagine LAT 100 Thieves, I think they might be thinking of a roster change too, because they have been way more aggressive in their roster changes throughout their entire history than Atlanta FaZe has, and historically more aggressive than OpTic has, even though OpTic this year was kind of making up for lost time, it seemed, where they're making 3 or 4 roster changes. But LAT, they finish with a top 6 finish, top 8 finish here. Again, on par with Boston, Omit, and Five Fears. And they lose to OpTic again. I'm sure that doesn't feel good in general, but certainly, the rivalry, the history between a lot of those players and the organizations. I just think it's probably time for them too, which it could line up where FaZe, takes 1 or 2 players off their team. 100 Thieves takes 1 or 2 players off their team, and I don't know if it's a trade is really necessary, but something where it kind of matches up for both of them. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I do think it is interesting to, you would, however you just phrased it, in terms of comparing 100 Thieves roster, willingness to make changes, yada yada. Um, we do have to remember that we are only, almost basically exactly a year uh, away from the point where they got rid of their most likely very expensive world championship team to quote unquote rebuild and uh kind of I don't think budget is the right word, but for lack of a better term, they
Yeah.
went for a less expensive option last season, and then they went all in here this year with this roster based on everything we heard. Nate Shot saying you take a pay cut, blah blah blah. Um, so it is very possible from an organizational standpoint, depending on those numbers and everything like that, that 100 Thieves and LAT could stand pat and just be like, we already spent the money on these guys. We don't want to, you know, spend more money if we're spending, all this on this team already. And that could inevitably be a deciding factor in whether or not this team makes changes. There are unquestionably a ton of variables that are going to be um, a part of this roster mania, but um, depending on the language of contracts and stuff, if Hydra or Scrap are somehow approached by potentially one of these other teams that we've heard rumors of potential Saudi teams looking to purchase spots and whatnot, even if they don't, we heard just last year that Gentlemates was in the running and potentially upping the price in a bidding war with 100 Thieves for part of this super team. Like it's very possible that, um, you know, for a lot of these, even the FaZe guys, that like some of these teams just throw an absolute massive offer at these guys, and depending on the structure of their contracts and whether there are restricted free agents or unrestricted free agents, like a lot of stuff could determine whether the team actually makes a move. But I do think 100 Thieves is uh, one of those interesting situations where I feel like if something absolutely nutty doesn't happen first, they would be kind of like okay with sticking with this current roster. But then in a world where, let's say, the Tiny Terrors split up and become available, that could be the first domino that gets them thinking, and then they try to, upgrade their pack a punch or however you want to phrase it. Um, so yeah, I definitely think, I think one thing I was gonna do for this episode, but I think we can wait until we have less to talk about from a tournament perspective, and it's more roster mania focus solely, is like looking at all 12 teams and their likelihood of making changes. And I think right now in my head, if I'm doing it from like a tier list perspective, it really feels like OpTic is in that not making a change category. I think Miami is. I've seen people saying like maybe Heretics try to get Stoopy from Boston, and that's the quote unquote next Spanish player they try to get. I also think Miami is in a position where they could just do what they've been doing these last couple of years, and it's like they keep their current roster and they try to sign like a fifth man amateur Spanish player who is on the bench, and then inevitably during the season he comes in to replace someone. Like they could go down that route. But I think outside of those two teams, um, I would say like FaZe, it feels like has a more strong likelihood of making a roster change than 100 Thieves, and it obviously could turn out that both teams do. Could turn out that both teams make a change with players on their rosters for the season. But end of the day, I just think there are a lot of variables for 100 Thieves, and I don't know what's gonna exactly be their approach, because like you said, it hasn't been this. It's not like it was the all-in mentality from
Mhm.
a financial perspective for the last couple of years. We have that blip in the radar of last season where they were trying to save money, and that just has me being probably a little more cautious in the back of my mind, as opposed to like saying like, yeah, 100 Thieves is gonna go out there and get Simp or BZ, no questions asked. Like I'm a little more hesitant to say that.
Yeah, those two teams are definitely the dominoes that I think
Yeah.
everybody else will be waiting on. If one of them, or certainly if both of them, make a change, then the entire league, probably barring OpTic and possibly Heretics, like everybody else is like, all right, like we have to make changes now. Like we're gonna get our guys poached. You know, the guys that we were scouting are kind of not available now, or they're a lot harder to get because we're competing against FaZe and or 100 Thieves. Um, I I don't know. I just have a feeling. I don't know if it'll be a complete overhaul for 100 Thieves. I don't know if they're going to be like, screw this, these guys suck. But I think just a lot of times it is just one player that it can, you can change out. And I think for FaZe, it might be the same kind of situation. That's been their MO for most of the CDL has been, we're going to make a change. We're not going to mess with the trio. But I don't know. Like that's they're in the worst position. I think that's really what it comes down to. FaZe is in the worst position they have ever been in the CDL, and that's crazy to think about considering 3 months ago they were the best team in the game. But
Yep.
it's a reality that back to back years where you're not competitive at champs, you place even worse at EWC. You get your worst placing ever. And I think the noise has become much too hard to ignore if you're FaZe. It may be the same for 100 Thieves, but
I
will see, I guess.
I do think too, just for the sake of continuity, I believe I brought this up last episode, but I can't remember at this point, and just want to make sure I say it while we're talking about the roster. I think it is important to remember that last year when there was that like quote unquote bidding war we were talking about and everything like that, everything we heard from a report standpoint was that it was a Scrap and Envoy duo, and that they were gonna play together no matter which organization it ended up being at. And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of the conversation already in the community is like, 100 Thief has to drop Envoy and get a new SMG. And it's like, well, if Scrap, the season MVP, really wanted to play with Envoy last year, obviously things could have changed over these last couple tournaments. But in all likelihood, if Scrap really wanted to play with him last year, he might still really want to play with him for another season. And that could be another factor that holds back 100 Thieves from potentially making some sort of blockbuster move.
Yeah, we've seen this many times throughout COD history. Some guys have their preferences. It's a friendship league, famously, and um, and obviously Envoy had a great season this year, and that should not be taken away. It just, this is what happens though. When you're a championship contender, you're expected to be one of the top teams at the end of the season, and then it doesn't turn out that way. I think the calculus kind of can change, not only for 100 Thieves but for FaZe. The same thing for OpTic. They came into this season, it's the opposite for OpTic, but they came into the season with that championship. They expected to do it, and then they completely went off the rails early, and so they had to change their roster multiple times to try to figure out, and then they finally did. I don't know if there's a Mercules floating out in the wind, so that you can just pick up so easily and transform your roster, like OpTic did.
Well,
But well,
I think that's a good segue. Unless you have something else to talk about, we can talk about Toronto slash movie star Koi, because they end up getting third at EWC, and this is another instance where they did make a roster change. This time it wasn't visa related, which I thought it was funny. Circling back to OpTic now, that Shotzi on stage literally gave a shout out to the border agent that blocked Beans from entering the country for Major Three, because that literally, I mean, you can think about it like from a financial standpoint, like that's a life changing moment for Mercules in the sense of he's now in the span of like 2 months made like almost $500,000 or maybe more than $500,000, whatever it is, and now he's like potentially one of the faces of OpTic going forward, but. Um, Speaking of Toronto and Koi, I did think it was really interesting, and it certainly stood out to me that, Beans dropped from the roster. They bring in Abe. Both of us don't know much about this kid, and it is another successful instance where Toronto is able to insert a third member or a fourth member into the previous team of three, and get a third place finish at a tournament, which is their best placing of this year, and they coincidentally did it twice with the rosters where they only competed at said tournament with that player, if that made sense. They, obviously
yeah,
they played with Beans majority of the tournaments outside of the two that they got their best placings in. And I have said, numerous times now since we've talked about the whole Merc and Beans situation, that like it's going to be really hard to strike gold if there's ever another emergency sub situation, and that's obviously not exactly what happened here, but it is pretty impressive in my opinion that Toronto was able to, you know, seamlessly introduce another challengers player who hadn't played at the professional level previously into the team, and they still get a third place finish. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on Toronto, but I thought it was a decent segue there comparing Merck and Abe. I felt like inevitably, just due to the situation with Merck previously playing for Toronto this year, and now Abe having a chance to sort of do the same thing, it did stand out to me, even not like from a specific play style standpoint or anything like that, but just in terms of like overall performance at the tournament. I think it does speak volumes to the Toronto staff and that system that they've had in place with the current players outside of, like Insight and Kleenex mostly, and obviously Joe for this year.
Yeah, I mean, it would. If I'm a Toronto fan, it would really piss me off that the Mercules thing happened. Just in general, I'd rather, if I'm them, like that having just not happened, I'd rather get like top 12 or have to forfeit major three instead of what happened in that scenario. But yeah, I mean, Abe should be a part of this roster moving forward. The only problem is like you don't really know what Toronto's rest of the roster will look like. So that's that is an issue. Hold on. Jesus Christ. But yeah, Toronto, they're probably going to make a I'm losing my voice somehow, but getting so choked up talking about Abe, it's crazy. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it through, but he's very impressive. But again, the surrounding parts, Joe should be on the roster. Like all three of these players that are around him are very talented, and they've proven that time and time again. But I mean, they've been restricted free agents every year, and we were just talking about 100 Thieves and FaZe thinking or potentially thinking about a change. This is the perfect team to think about, especially considering obviously Envoy and Scrap just played with a bunch of these guys a season ago. 100 Thieves is familiar with Joe Deceives as well from last season with their roster. It's, like they're a team that's probably ripe for the picking for a lot of these other teams. But if they're willing to pay the money and keep this core together, they can be a competitive team next year. I don't know if a championship team, because Insight's going to have to step up. He had probably his worst season of his career this past year, which is unfortunate because I think he's very talented. But I think it whatever happened this season, it did not really reflect well on the rest of his career, and it certainly didn't help them in general. I'm just not sure about their future in general because of the way that they've kind of operated within their team over the past few seasons.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, like looking ahead, if Abe sticks with this Toronto team, and even in a world where he doesn't, I just think it's really, impressive what Toronto was able to do, at least in terms of like having a meaningful placing at an event that you don't win. The fact that they were able to get two top three finishes with, amateurs players debuting at the pro level for the first time, and it happened on two separate occasions. That really did stick out to me. I think, sorry, I do think, like you were kind of alluding to, Toronto is going to be an interesting one for roster mania because of like what you said with, the organization seemingly giving players an opportunity to explore their options every offseason in CDL history. I think Joe Deceives is an interesting case in the sense of he obviously was signed last offseason to Toronto based on what we know about contract structure in the CDL. It's possible that Toronto could look to extend him for a 1+1 deal. It's also possible that he could get an offer from multiple other teams, and he's not willing to turn those offers down. You mentioned 100 Thieves. I really think. Let me see. Yeah. I think the name that I am really just have linked with Joe Deceives is Abizi. I know they're really good friends, and they play ranked together, and I'm pretty sure they even like vacation together in the off season last year. I think even Draza did too, so might not mean much. But end of the day, I do think in a world where a Beezy stays on FaZe and Simp leaves, I could see Joe Deceives like instantly wanting to go to FaZe to play with a Beezy. There are, other situations where like a Beezy leaves to join a team, and then that Joe Deceives doesn't have an opportunity to follow him to another team if like a Beezy's the final player to join a squad, like 100 Thieves or something like that. Um, but I think especially with these rumors, not even real rumors around the Tiny Terrors or whatever, but in a world where Simp and Abeezy and the Tiny Terrors finally break up, Abeezy or sorry, Joe Deceives and Neptune uh, are obviously two SMG players that we've really talked a lot about this season, and they could, depending on the situation, uh, they're both players, especially Neptune, because he entered this year from Challengers. He's likely on a contract that's not super expensive. Vancouver could look to just extend him, but he's also a candidate. If he gets another offer, he can't refuse from another team. He could look elsewhere too. So I think that's Joe Deceives and Neptune. I feel like they are in very similar situations from a contract standpoint. Even from the outside looking in, don't have any insight into what their actual contracts look like, but with basic information on CDL contracts and everything like that, it feels like they're in very similar situations heading into this offseason. And given the rumors of potential FaZe moves, they are immediately two interesting SMG options to potentially play with either of the Tiny Terrors if that duo splits up, as is someone like Kleenex, which we talked about. He mentioned. We talked about before him playing on the flex for this event, and I forget his exact wording in his tweet. It was something at the very end here. He said, "Might be time to hang up the flex early." So he could be being a little harsh on himself because obviously Toronto played well, or Koi played well as a team this event, and I can specifically remember him having some decent moments. It was with an SMG, but there was one vault control, I believe, where he went on like a 5 spree in the other team spawn. I can't even remember what team it was against, and I was just like, yeah, this is prime Kleenex right here. He still got it. So Kleenex is another interesting opportunity, and I think uh, you know, until we start getting reports and murmurings and stuff, it's going to be a lot of ambiguous stuff in terms of, yeah, this team could do basically anything, and that's the position a lot of these teams are in. But Toronto is one, definitely a team I have circled because there are multiple avenues they could go down for as an organization, and the players individually could go down too. Yep. Yes. Nope. I definitely do think there is some validity to trying to keep at least most of this team together, but I do think it is important to note, and again, this is without any actual insight into the contract situations, but like we're talking about with Neptune and Jodeci's potentially being on those 1+1 deals to where the organization can just extend them for this next season, it is very likely that Abuza and O4 were on 1+1 years, 1+1 deals for the last 2 years, which could mean that both Abuza and O4 are unrestricted free agents. Again, that's speculative. Don't know anything for sure. But just based on background knowledge of how the contracts potentially work, that could be, um, just something to note and could potentially ruin any plans of, in theory, running back this squad for Vancouver. At the same time, saying that, it's also very possible that those guys, even if they are unrestricted free agents, that are like, yeah, we got unfinished business to do. 0-4 in 4 grand finals appearances on land this year. No, well, I said I wasn't talking about 0 for the player there. 0 and 4 in 4 finals appearances. That could be incentive for 0-4 and Abuza to be like, yeah, I want to run it back with this squad. I want to get it done, and I want to win a championship with these guys. We've been so close in our first, not even a full season playing together. Let's see what we can make happen. So that is, I do think, at the bare minimum, it feels like Vancouver is in a position to at least retain Neptune and Nasty. Just again, that's purely based on how they played this year and most likely their contract situation since it's their first season with Vancouver Surge. The organization could, in theory, just tack on the extra year extension or however that works. But Abuza and 0-4, in theory, potentially being unrestricted free agents could throw, like a wrench in the plans or whatever. So that is an interesting sort of development that we'll have to keep an eye on with this squad. I do know, um, I don't know, but one thing I have said, I don't even know if other people in the community have really said it, but just like, I know Abuza isn't French, but like that possible connection with Gentlemate and European fans if Abuza gets an offer from that team. To play with someone like Cobra, who I've mentioned before too, if they're targets for that team, that could be something that also throws a wrench in these plans, but that's all speculation. That's not based on anything concrete.
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool if we had like Abuza, Cobra, and Hydra on one team to really solidify this French speaking connection. But what I was saying about the validity of keeping it together completely and not making any changes is that it's a very real strategy in traditional sports, particularly in basketball, where teams that are kind of close or not even like real close, but they are like, all right, like we made the playoffs, like we had some bad breaks, some bad injuries, things didn't work out for this year, but we're going to run it back next year with pretty much the same team, the same coach, everything. The reason those teams do that is because it gives them an opportunity, another opportunity to win a championship. And sometimes the bad luck strikes the other teams. Sometimes, you get the injuries and you get the bad luck, and sometimes the injuries and bad luck go to your opponents and you're able to take advantage of those opportunities. I mean, it's happened before, I guess. Like a team, I think like the Dallas Empire in 2020 was like they had a really rough start to the season. It wasn't that great, and they just kind of stuck it out. And FaZe looked like they were probably going to run away with it, and Dallas just kept chugging along, and then they finally clicked into place and won. United has tried this, or they tried this multiple times. It didn't really work out too well. A lot of other teams have also tried sticking it out and seeing how things worked. I think the best example was probably, more recently, is the Seattle Surge, when they had Pred and Sib and Accuracy and Mac. They ran it back, even though there was a real compelling offer from OpTic to sell off Pred's contract and kind of cash out at that moment, even though it was not good for the championship success of the team. It backfired in the end because they did not have the success that they wanted to or possibly expected themselves to, and Pred ended up leaving after the season anyway. It's not the exact same situation, but it is, making a bet on yourself that even though, Seattle had their shortcomings and they were not a perfect team by any means, they tried to give themselves another opportunity or more opportunities that season to win championships, and it didn't work out. I'd like to see them, possibly keep this same core going into next season, but like we've mentioned a few times, the dominoes lie with LA Thieves and Atlanta FaZe. If one or both of those teams make changes, it'd be very shocking if the Vancouver Surge also did not make a change. Whether that is to, for one of their players to go to LAT or Atlanta, or however that may work. But I think they probably will make a change. I just don't know who they could possibly bring in that will get them to the same level. Because this is kind of like the perfect storm of things. Like, they have this incredible team. They just haven't been able to break through at the very, very top level, even though, at Champs, they were incredibly close to doing so. And a lot of these grand finals that they got swept in, like, the individual maps have been very close, which, that's a really confusing thing, I'm sure, for them about, like, whether how much they should take out of that, or how much they should kind of blame themselves or think that they could have changed things. I'm just very interested to see what Vancouver does going into this off season. Miami, though, I think they're probably. You got one more thing?
Before I want to talk about Miami, but I do want to talk about this as it is very fresh. As of 20 minutes ago, Ronnie Intel just reported something that we probably most likely all saw coming. That Gentlemate / LAG are officially set to blow it up. The interesting thing in this report is just that he mentions Kismet specifically will become a free agent, says Lunars and DiamondCon are also set to be released, but a final decision on Johnny is pending. So I think that is interesting to note that Johnny might stick around, and he certainly had some moments here and there, but obviously, given the situation with Gentlemates this year, he didn't necessarily have the best opportunity to fully showcase what he's capable of. But immediately, this might not be Tiny Terror level Domino as we were talking about earlier, but Kismet, if he officially becomes a free agent, immediately becomes one of the top SNG options on the market. So wanted to get that report out fresh while I just saw it on the timeline.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have no idea. They can go any direction. I don't know how much investment Gentlemates wants to make into this. That's been a key part that we haven't talked about yet today is, the dominoes lie with FaZe and Thieves, but the potential power imbalance could come from teams like C9 and the Falcons and Gentlemates. These teams that, if they want to invest, they can really shake things up, and they could really make it tough on some of the bigger teams, the more well-known teams like FaZe, LAT, OpTic, all them. But I don't know what their strategy is going to be. Vegas certainly has just from the parent organization, certainly have the ability to do this, but I don't know how they're feeling about their current roster, or the restrictions they might have with having Saudi players on the team, if that's something they want to go back to, all that. C9, I think this year was a complete wash. I would expect them to actually build a team this coming season, or this coming off season. And Gentlemates is probably in the same boat, because I don't know how much they really were able to control everything with this team. But it's also a 12-team league, and there's a lot of competition for players. So I'm interested to see Ojani being kept around is a very interesting choice. I don't know what that indicates for the future, but we talked about it on the last episode that VOs would probably have a pretty good idea of like what the players are in general because of the Diamond Con effect and him being very familiar with that one player and being able to judge independently what the other guys are around him. I don't know, like they obviously didn't have a great showing at EWC, and it's very hard to judge that one way or the other. But let's talk about Miami because they are one of the most fascinating teams. I said that Vancouver is probably the most pleasant surprise. Heretics is right up there as well. This all-Spanish roster with the two best rookies this season that were eligible really for the award, not counting Mercules. They have just kind of, they nearly won this event pretty much because I think if they had beaten OpTic in the semifinals, there's a real good chance that they would have ended up winning this event. In general, they didn't eliminate FaZe, but they knocked them down into the lower part of the group play, which then facilitated the elimination of FaZe. They were one of the only, I believe they are still the only team to have beaten FaZe and LA Thieves on LAN at different points of the season, because I don't believe OpTic ended up beating FaZe on LAN. Did they do that at Champs?
They did. They played first round.
Okay, so them and OpTic. So them and the World Champions and EWC Champions are the only two teams to have done that.
Well, Vancouver did too, but that's okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, my point still does not stand anymore, but thank you, Bink, for completely destroying my point. Regardless, Heretics is a very good team. I'll just leave it at that. They were very good. They were certainly one of the top 4 or 5 best teams in this league, which sounds very like kind of backhanded compliment, but when you think about like how OpTic ended up becoming one of the best teams in the league again toward the end of the season, Vancouver was for 3/5, 4/5 of the season one of the best teams, FaZe and LAT obviously winning majors. This is a really interesting team. They certainly can get better. I would say like they're not at their ceiling, or I certainly hope they're not at their ceiling, but they do have incentives to make roster changes like all these other teams that did not win a championship this year. They just don't have very many players that they can do that with. Like they're constrained in a way by this Spanish speaking or Spanish roster. I don't think it's really constrained by the actual language, but it's more just they've committed themselves as a Spanish organization to having Spanish players, which is perfectly fine. That's awesome for them. That limits them because obviously they're not going to sign American players, or they're, you said Snoopy is like a potential option, which if they wanted to just stick with like Hispanic and like a Spanish speaking roster, then that works. But if they're just looking at Spanish players, then they're kind of limited to, I'm sure there aren't like, they have this whole area that they can recruit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have a bunch of CDL level talent ready to come in to their roster and, kind of continue on where they are. So they're in a tough spot. They're in a really good spot for a team that not many expected to do well. They have 3 players, I think, that are just like they have to keep, like, regardless of what happens. And then, not to just absolutely scapegoat anybody, but Metals is the guy that is, like, I think at risk of being replaced. I don't think it's going to be Rao, Rincor, or Super. So it just comes down to whether they want to replace Metals at this point in time. I think they're probably in the Vancouver situation where it makes a lot of sense to just run it back and just rely on the chemistry that you built over the last 4 or 5 months of this season. What do you think?
Is the Twitch stream working for you?
I do not know. Yeah.
Okay. I got the spinning circle of death right now. YouTube's working, so I figured, and I could hear you, but now Twitch just crashed for me.
Well, I don't know if that's a me thing or a you thing. It's not a me thing currently, but that doesn't mean anything.
Okay, it's not live for me, but
okay.
YouTube seems to be working. So,
just keep talking and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. For Miami, kind of like you alluded to, I think that the interesting uh, option for them, if it is a realistic option, is Snoopy. But kind of like you said, I think that's most people's minds right now with this squad would be replacing Metals, and I thought Metals played very well for this team, certainly this weekend at EWC, as well as at numerous points. And I don't think he's necessarily like a quote unquote weak link or anything like that. So I realistically think Miami's in a situation where they stick with the four-man roster of Metals, Real, Rencor, and Super, and they look for a fifth option. You mentioned like difficulties and whatnot, potentially like that. Like they have done Heretics has done a really good job in a limited amount of time of identifying that talent. Even just this year with signing Rencor in the offseason and Super as a sub, and then bringing them both in the roster, and outside of Mercules, two of the top rookies this season. Um, so yeah, I don't know for sure what Heretics will do. I do specifically wanted to mention, that series with OpTic in the winners bracket. We kind of talked about it, and you mentioned like how it all played out a little bit in terms of uh, the 250 249 map one 6-5 in the search and a 3-2 in the control. I had it, I think is from IOU Turtle on Twitter. Says it's the first time ever in the CDL era that there was a 250 249 hardpoint 6-5 S&D and 3-2 control in the first three maps of a CDL series. Um, so that certainly, speaks to what I'm about to say in terms of I believe that's probably the best 5 game series of this season. There's no other 5 game best of 5 series that jumps to mind for me. I guess the one would be winners finals at Major 1 between Atlanta and LAT. The reason I'm saying 5 game series too is I think just the finals of Major 1 where it goes game 7 round 11, that's still my series of the year. Um, but this is certainly right up there. It was, um, you know, almost OpTic pretty much choked the first two maps, and it could have realistically been a 3-0 for OpTic. Miami was kind of in the lead for the first hard point, then OpTic took the lead, and I think it was like 240-ish to like 210-ish, something like that. And then Miami made the push to clinch that first hard point, and then OpTic was up 5-1 in the map 2 S&D, I believe, and Miami won 5 straight rounds to take that one. And uh, yeah, so OpTic reverse swept to keep their tournament life alive, and like you said, I really, if Heretics won this series, they would have been in a very good position to take the whole event. And the only other thing from the series that we didn't specifically mention, there was multiple moments for OpTic this whole weekend, but my favorite moment from the entire tournament was Mercules 1v3 clutch in the game 5 against Miami. It was in the round 8. I think it was 4-3. Uh, yeah, so it was in round 8. Miami Heretics is in a 3v1 situation to tie it up and make it a 4-4 map count, and Mercules pulls off an insane 1v3 to give OpTic the 5-3 lead in the search. And given how late it was in that search map, and already with the thoughts of a potential reverse sweep looming in the back of your mind, you got to think that was like a pretty big dagger for the Heretics boys to have to deal with and at the moment, and all that. So that was a pretty wild play from Merc, which we've come to see from him overall this in his short time in the CDL. But yeah, with the Heretics boys, really, really, I'm proud of how they played after inserting Super on a full time basis into the squad. I've talked multiple times now over the last couple episodes of how, um, you know, I like search teams, and they were a really good search team towards the end of the year. So, um, I think Super, he had his moments where he was fiery, and even gotten a little bit of hot water with trash talk and whatnot. And I think a personality like that on a team like Heretics, which maybe other people aren't really thinking about in terms of like trash talk, especially when you compare like Scrap versus Draza and that sort of thing. Um, that's good for building Heretics moving forward and building a fan base and all that stuff. So I'm really excited for what the future holds for this team. I do think I will say the other caveat for this team is if Real gets an offer from a non-Spanish team in the CDL, that is a possible outcome, just given again without super confirmation or any real insight into his contract, seemingly being on a 1+1 from last year, he could potentially be a free agent. And we heard very brief rumors of him potentially going to OpTic when before
Yeah.
the Mercury stuff happened. So that could potentially open the door for Real to field offers from some of these other teams. And I've spoken very highly of Real over these last 2 years. I think he would be, he'd be right up there on a list with like Kismet and Joe Deceives and Neptune as uh, potential SMG upgrades for any team looking to sign another SMG. Um, so I think that's more likely to potentially be the reason for Miami making a roster change as opposed to the team actually wanting to make a change. But it's also possible, again, that Real feels like this team has unfinished business to do with how they played in half a season with this four-man roster, and that could also lead to him wanting to re-sign with Heretics. So interesting offseason ahead for them. I do think they are more likely in the camp of sticking with the squad and potentially looking for another Spanish speaking sub to just add to a five-man roster heading into 2026, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, they have a lot of reason to just run it back, especially if other teams are making changes, because then you never really know if those are going to pan out for other teams. And I was just looking at how well the Heretics did down the last 2 month stretch of the season. After getting swept by LAT in Major 3, they beat FaZe in Game 5, then lost to Toronto in Game 5. Then they won 7 straight matches, including beating LAT twice in that time period, both in Game 5. Ended up losing twice at Major 4, once to FaZe, once to LAT. They beat Vancouver, they beat FaZe again, and then the one, like, I guess real blunder is that they lost to Boston at Champs in Winners Round 2 in Game 5. But that was also like Boston's best event of the entire season and their best event as a franchise so far. So I I don't know how much to take away from that. And then obviously they lose to Vancouver here, or not here, at Champs in the losers bracket, and then they lose to OpTic in a very competitive series like you just laid out at EWC. So it's, for them, I think you run it back. Like, they probably even have a better, more convincing case for themselves than Vancouver did, because they brought in Super even later than Vancouver brought in Neptune. I don't know if they were really expecting this kind of success either. And I think with how young these guys are, how relatively inexperienced a lot of them are, it might be in their best interest to just run it back and see what you can do next year against a potentially new look LA Thieves, a new look Atlanta FaZe, possibly a new look Vancouver Surge. Really, a lot of things that could be completely different and, by effect, worse. So that's a good case for them. I'm very excited to see what they do coming into this offseason. We're over an hour into our podcast here. I don't know how much you have to talk about some of these other teams. We've covered most of the top 8 already, but
That's where
anything,
I want.
the Cloud9 thing, I think, is probably something that you were pretty interested in, just because you are a big Win fan, and there was a lot of excitement going into this. Anything else pop out to you at EWC?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to the two teams there, Omit and Five Fears, for actually getting top 8 at this event. If you look at EWC 2024 last year, the top 8 was all 8, or it was comprised of only CDL teams, 8 CDL teams. And this year we had 2 challengers teams and 6 CDL teams in the top 8 in a year where there has been a lot of conversation around, the whole Envoy thing, talking about like challengers and potential, his feelings towards the amount of talent in challengers, yada yada. And especially given these circumstances with like Merc and Abe, rising through the ranks quickly. Even someone like Hook started the year in challengers, was able to get on OpTic, win back-to-back events here. Neptune, 4 grand finals, starting the year in challengers. This has to put that conversation to bed, in my eyes at least, and prove that we really have to see what what we can potentially, I say we, what the CDL can potentially do
Mm,
in terms of expansion or just getting more of these types of events where the challengers players are playing against the CDL teams, because it's proven at this event that even a team as talented as FaZe can lose to the right CDL team or the right amateur team when things are clicking for those squads. So shout out to Five Fears, Xseed, Hixie, Fire, and Capsidol. Capsidol in particular was able to knock out Cloud9, the team that he played for very briefly at the end of the season, and was dropped ahead of this event for Gwen, and then he's able to knock Cloud9 out of the tournament. So that was pretty cool storyline wise. And then yeah, Omit with Vivid and Mac, two guys who were pretty. I don't think quickly, but they were knocked out of the CDL um, earlier this year, and we've talked about how that worked out for those teams and our feelings around that, especially in case of Vivid and Carolina. But Craze and Mamba really stood out for that squad, and they obviously played well as a four-man unit. I even saw Attach tweet. Let me look before I say what it was, but I saw Attach tweet something about yeah. So last night he said it's unlikely, but I would love to see that Omit roster get picked up as a whole squad into the CDL next season. They have insane chem and could keep building on it. I agree with him that feels incredibly unlikely, just given the
yeah.
state of the CDL and all that. But I do think Mamba and Craze have certainly made a case for themselves by performing very well at this tournament, as did Abe, potentially given the contract situation for him and all that. Those are three guys who spent the majority of the season in challengers and could be next up on a list of quote unquote top prospects or challengers players looking to start the 2026 CDL season in the pro league.
Like you, I want to see more challengers integration. I think it would give not only the CDL a different flavor and give CDL teams like different looks, as I think that also helps them improve if they're able to see what teams and challengers are doing, not only in scrims but in official matches, and be able to scout and kind of learn things and pick up things throughout the season. But it would also, most importantly, give challengers players something to strive for, not just being like, this glass ceiling that they have in challengers where you can only get to a certain level and that's really all there is. Like you can go win a challengers open and then you just kind of have to hope and pray that somebody gives you a spot on a CDL team. This would probably open up some things for, organizations like Omit, who have been very, very committed to challengers, and in Team War, those are the two that pop out to me in particular, of organizations that have just continued to stick with challengers even when financially it doesn't make a ton of sense. But Omit and Team War have done that, and I think we should be able to reward those organizations by bringing them into the CDL, if not full time and make them full members, but at least to give them some kind of competition and some kind of entrance into the CDL, even if it is for just like one or two events or whatever throughout the season. So hopefully the CDL can integrate that, because the EWC has kind of figured out how to do that. So it shouldn't be too hard for the Call of Duty League. I'm going to just go run down the placings real quick. So first place, obviously, OpTic Gaming. They win $600,000. They've also automatically qualified for next year's EWC. Second place, Vancouver Surge, $320,000. Third place, Movistar Koi, aka the Toronto Ultra, $200,000. Fourth place, Team Heretics, Miami Heretics, $120,000. Fifth through eighth, so each of these teams gets $80,000 each. 100 Thieves, Boston Breach, Omit, and Five Fears. Ninth through 12th, each of the teams get $40,000. Cloud9, Gentlemates, Team Falcons, and FaZe Clan. And then top 16, each of these teams earn $20,000. G2 Esports, Team Orchid, Team War, and Project 7. Anything else before we get out of here? Anything you want to talk about as we finish out?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Assault and Vance, especially Assault, in the sense of he officially announced on stage that he's retiring after this tournament. We've seen historically throughout COD that players have announced they're retiring only for them to come back later, but it felt like this is the end of the line for Assault, obviously. A part of that historic 2018 COD Champs Evil Geniuses squad where they won COD Champs and he was tournament MVP. Also the event where we met each other in person, so felt like it was appropriate to give him a shout out, congratulate him on his career, wish him best of luck going forward. And Vance is a little more uncertain because all we have to go on with him is he tweeted like a GIF of black and white of what looks like a soccer player like waving goodbye, but didn't officially announce anything as far as I saw, and Assault actually did. So, not sure if this is the end of the road for Vance, but if it is, congratulations on one of the best careers for a European Call of Duty player ever, hands down. Can't even be debated, even if you have Hydra ahead of him. So yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on them, but then I think we talk about the Halo thing very quick, and then we're good to go.
No, just kind of an end of an era, because these two players were probably at their best during the CWL era.
Yeah.
So obviously, like you mentioned, winning champs with EG. He was a great interview too, which I remember distinctly.
Yep.
And it probably helps when, I vividly remember him saying, it's nice not to be a Silver Surfer anymore, because EG and, his past with, not being able to win the big one and then finally doing it at champs. And like you said, Bance, one of the very best European players of all time, kind of a pioneer in that sort. That Splice team that won in IW, they won the stage finals, I think stage 1 or stage 2,
yeah. Something like that.
Which was the first time I believe that a European team had won a major North American event. So that can't be taken away from him. Obviously, I'm sure the end of his career did not go the way that he wanted to, but he made it to Champs Grand Finals, if I'm not mistaken. He won events. He was a top player in the CWL and even the CDL. So there's nothing to be ashamed about at any point in his career, and the same for Assault. The last thing on the list is the Halo Esports thing. I saw this and I did not understand what was happening at first, because obviously I don't cover or really care too much about Halo Esports, but Halo Infinite, the support for it from the Halo World Championship, which is their version of the CWL essentially. The support for Halo Infinite is ending this year, which kind of calls into question how things are going to work in that esports scene, which is, even if you don't care about it, it is like a predecessor to competitive Call of Duty in a lot of ways, because it was where MLG made its name, and then MLG kind of took what they saw working in Halo and brought it to Call of Duty. And a lot of the players that you and I grew up watching, or just kind of pioneered the esport, they found themselves really in Halo. Crim6 famously was a Halo pro before he was a Call of Duty pro. Obviously, Formal, one of the best players of all time, he was one of the best Halo players, and then he still is one of the best Halo players. Shotzi, a former world champion, or not world champion. No, he is a world champion, right? And then obviously Hook was also an incredible Halo player. There's on and on and on, and not to mention like how Maven got his start in Halo, and now is in Call of Duty. There's just so many people that are connected between these two esports, so many organizations that are also very connected through these two esports. So it does make me concerned, at least, that this esport that helped pave the way in many ways for competitive Call of Duty will no longer be around, or to the same effect. So what was your initial reaction to this news?
Yeah, that's I just like you don't follow the Halo scene or anything like that. It does sound like to me that this is like related to this current Halo game, and that if another Halo game comes out anytime soon, that would just be picked up as the competitive title. But it's also possible that this could just be like they move completely away from doing officially sanctioned esports tournament in a CWL-esque fashion. So I'm not really obviously for Halo fans, that's a tough situation to be in and all that. So I don't want to talk too much on that because I just don't know. And I'm, kind of ignorant to that whole situation. But what I am most interested in is this potentially having an impact on roster mania for next season for 2026 if this stuff, if there's no Halo to be played next season, some of these top Halo players could look to get a CDL opportunity. And the first name that comes to mind is Formal. Um, OpTic would be in a very weird situation if Formal decides like no Halo to play, I want to come play COD. What do? Do they break up this roster that just won back-to-back events to give Formal another chance? I think it would be more likely that Formal retires, but if he really has that itch to keep competing, that could definitely be uh, a very interesting situation to monitor. We don't know what happened. There was the situation when Formal first went back to Halo. He was like loaned. He wasn't on an official team. I think he played for Sentinels.
Yeah, I think so.
And another team in there too. It might have been FaZe, but I don't even know if it was FaZe. But he did play for other teams before returning to OpTic Halo on a full-time basis. So it's possible something like that plays out if he does, if Halo Esports, is sunset and he really still wants to compete and come back to COD. The other name is Legend. I believe that's how you say. There's a Q in there at the start, so I don't even know if that's actually how you say it. But there's a clip of Kason saying that he's like he would be at the top of his list as a player that could come over from Halo and have an immediate impact in the CDL. And Legend himself did tweet out he's a free agent for Black Ops 7, so that is interesting. Don't know anything about him, but obviously people are talking about him and he's gross at Halo. That bodes well for his potential to play well in the CDL. And the other name that immediately comes to mind is Frosty, someone who we saw at the very start of the CDL era have success with the Florida Mutineers, and then he made his way back to Halo once again. Would he be interested in returning to COD Esports? Those are just three names. And obviously the field opens up even more if Halo Infinite Esports is done and dusted after all this and ahead of the off season. So that's where my head is focused at. I will be monitoring the Halo situation specifically from the stance of what type of impact it will have on CDL roster mania for 2026, which will be all we're talking about for the next couple of months.
Yeah, so I believe the rumor is, and unfortunately there's no confirmation or anything, but the rumor is that the next Halo game will come out next fall. So before, around the holidays when whatever Black Ops 8 comes out. I don't know what the game after this will be called. So that gives them basically a year. So the Halo World Championship is this October. Obviously the CDL would probably begin in December-ish. So that would give you a little bit of time, a little bit of crossover, not much. But it would also give you if you give these players an entire year where they don't have any kind of competitive system to be in. And I'm sure that isn't something a lot of them want to do or a lot of them can afford to do. It's not like, esports is like super well paying in a lot of ways. So, it is very possible that we see some of these players make the jump. We've seen that in the past before. Formal, he came over with a bunch of Halo pros along with Enable. Snipe Down was also a part of Call of Duty for a little bit. Several other players have kind of like come and gone. And like you said, with Frosty, he came to the CDL and then was like, Halo's kind of the bread and butter, so I'm going to go back there. I don't know if they're going to be too keen to come back to COD. Formal made it very clear why he quit the last time.
With the scrims.
Yeah, and how much these games suck. And it was not like I'm not good enough. It's like I do not care to be good enough at this game because I am miserable, which is a very common sentiment. Ask Scump too, like just deciding to quit 2 months into the season. I just don't see Formal coming back full time. I think especially if there's blackout or some kind of war zone kind of thing in Black Ops 7 where he can become like kind of a full-time streamer for at least a year. I think that's probably the most likely scenario, and probably just compete like in wagers or some kind of thing. I just can't see him coming back. I know there were the rumors not that long ago, like maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3, where people thought that he might come back, and it just didn't seem realistic that this guy who didn't want to put in the work to, and that's not like a shot at him, but like he just wasn't having fun anymore. And I just don't know if you can kind of, get that back together. I don't know if that's something that can actually be done. Legend or some of these younger guys that really have never been in Call of Duty for an extended period, I think that's more realistic. I think we could see those people come in and have a lot of success, or at least give it a try for the 25-26 the 25-26 season in Black Ops 7. So we'll see what happens. I'm interested though. I love when the Halo guys come over. I thought it was really cool when Primal came over, which was like the first big one that I can remember, and I think that was in Ghosts, if I'm not mistaken. It was not easy for them, to get started, but I think there's more crossover now than there ever has been before in terms of the Halo Call of Duty stuff. Like, it seems like the transition can get pretty seamless for most of these guys if they're the really top level players. And if Legend does that, then I mean, more power to them. I think that about does it.
One last thing that I promise we're out of here. Breaking Point just tweeted. They're doing the Dope Check podcast now. You guys want to go check that out. Obviously, shout out Breaking Point for all they do throughout the whole season. GG Breaking Point on Twitter. They just tweeted out they do like the graded cards or stats cards, whatever it is, and they awarded their 2025 EWC Burger King, which is who they put a Burger King crown on whoever was the burger or the quote unquote worst player at the event. They gave it to Bink, not me. The other Bink, who was a coach and emergency filled in for Timor at the event. So it's a bad day to be a Bink. I just tweeted that, and that's all I have to say on that matter.
I'm going to have to Photoshop this card to put the other Bink in there. So, I think that about does it. We're about an hour and a half in. I do not know when we're going to be doing another show. If people drop news, then it'll be a lot sooner than we think. It's been a long season. We started the podcast years ago, but at least this season, we went 2 episodes a week for most of the weeks. There were, some different parts of the year that we didn't do it nearly as much, but it's been, essentially 8 straight months ish. And it has been tiring, but it has been very rewarding. And I've really appreciated how much love and support we've got from the competitive COD community and our Ego Chall podcast community, however tiny it might be. It's always cool when people come into the chat and shout us out, or to or just say hi and tell us how much they like it. So we do appreciate your support. We hope that throughout this off season, we hope that it's really exciting off season. I think that always helps. But we look forward to seeing more of you during this off season and during the roster mania period. But in the meantime, please like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, as well as YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can watch the live stream version if you want, or you can watch the VOD version, which cuts out like the pre-show and all that stuff. And, if I make mistakes or Bing makes mistakes, we have technical difficulties that tries to edit around them, so it seems a little bit better than it actually is. Please give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2 Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast tour is at Ego Chall Podcast. Again, not sure exactly when the next show will be. I would like to at least do a show every 2 weeks at the very minimum, just to kind of check in. It gets very hard to do these podcasts if we go like a month, because then I forget how to even speak to other human beings. So I prefer not to do that. So at the very least, I would hope that we do it every other week. But it also depends, like if we do not have anything to talk about, or we can't think of anything to kind of fill the space between these roster moves and all that, then it just makes it really difficult. I don't know, like Bink and I just play like games or something, like play like Wordle for an hour and a half. Like I don't know if that's really possible, but we'll try to make the best of it this off season. And again, I hope that it's just really interesting, so we don't have to do any of that crap. But that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for all the love and support this season. Like Preston said, obviously I think it's pretty apparent this was our most successful season of the Ego Chall podcast. Like Preston said, even did more shows and we got a bunch of subscribers on YouTube. I set like an unofficial goal for us to hit 300 after we saw a surge in subscribers earlier this season, and we got the 254 right now. So that's a pretty solid mark in my mind. Now this season's over, and I think set the lofty goal of doubling that and hitting 500 subs by the end of next season. That'd be really cool to see, but that's in the distant future and not too important at this point. I just, like Preston said, really want to thank you guys, all the regulars and everything like that, for showing love and supporting the show and giving us a platform to talk about an esport that that we have loved for a long time. And even if the amount we play the game and whatnot has changed over the years, our passion for the scene and breaking down everything that goes on at the tournaments and whatnot, that hasn't changed. So thank you guys a lot. It really does mean just means a ton to me and Preston. So yeah, we'll be around during this off season and talking about stuff when it comes, but the schedule will probably be in a little bit of a flux. If nothing's happened by next week, I would like to just do a very like blanket intro show, as I was kind of alluding to, in terms of like doing like a tiered ranking of uh what we think the teams in the CDL are most likely to do given their current situation. Obviously, all that could just be thrown out the window if a team sells or leaves or announces very early it's keeping its roster. But we'll be around nonetheless. It's just schedule's going to be a little less consistent now that we don't have to follow the schedule for matches and tournaments and stuff. So long-winded answer here at the end, but I really do, bottom of my heart, thank you very much for all the love and support this season. We will see you back here at some point, just don't know when it is. And remember to send the chow.